The gaming industry is not what it used to be. Yes, it's more profitable now, but a large part of that profitability comes from in-game transactions, or simply releasing carbon copies of the same title year after year. In other words, the industry has lost its soul. Yes, there are still some good games released every year, but the majority of big brands just don't seem to care anymore. And as a result, nor do their audience. If you're like me, you miss when games were more fun. A new era of gaming was born with the introduction of the PlayStation 2. Even its startup animation was iconic. First of all, it was introduced in the year 2000, a deliberate choice by Sony to kick off the new millennium. Right now, there is an explosion of nostalgia for this time period, most notably in fashion. You'll notice a lot of Gen Z people adopting a kind of specific interpretation of Y2K style. Is it entirely accurate? Maybe not, but at least it's a thing. And it's not just in fashion. There are multiple other areas of Y2K nostalgia. So many look fondly at cars and electronics at the time, which were often chrome and futuristic, reflecting the optimism of the time. Earth was entering a new century, and all kinds of things would soon be possible. Video games too reflected this optimism. Developers could see the world was changing, and they openly embraced this. There's a reason menus and themes of the 2000s were so sci-fi inspired. This is a big reason why people are so nostalgic for 2000s video games. It's just the time period that suits it currently. Those of us who were children at the time are now young adults. And most of us have fond memories of playing the PlayStation 2 or maybe the original Xbox. Nostalgia is cyclical. Every decade or so there is a big shift, as a new generation get old enough to reminisce about the past like a wise old monk. And think about it, while not every adult enjoys playing video games, every child does. So maybe gaming is just the most obvious place for this kind of internal nostalgia to let itself out. After all, a lot of people who weren't even alive at the time can appreciate the kind of games I speak of. The gaming industry of the early 2000s was quite different. Success was never guaranteed. Every release was a risk. Gameplay had to be engaging throughout, and storylines had to make sense. Technical limitations might be to blame. Relying on modern graphics was simply not possible, so they actually had to put the work in to make a good game. Imagine that. You never saw a developer deliberately annoy their own customer. You never saw in-game transactions, and not everything had to be real and politically relevant. Games were less corporate, more whimsical. They were just more fun. Think of the platformer games of the time, the kinds dominant on the PlayStation 2. Ratchet & Clank, Jak and Daxter, and some of the later Crash Bandicoot and Spyro games. Yes, you had 3D platformer games in the 90s, but it's a different thing. Some of them were good, but the graphics and the playability, it's not what I'm talking about. In some ways, I feel like this was the peak of all gaming. You had in-depth world building, characters we actually grew to love, and meticulous level design. The end result is a game that's fun no matter how seriously you play it. I spent hours on Sly 2 just running around on rooftops and stealing gems, or driving in Jak 3. Another thing 3D platformers did well was in-game collectibles. They were pointless and mean nothing, but just exploring the maps was fun enough that we did it anyway. Why? Because we're losers. The results speak for themselves. Not only did they do big numbers in the early 2000s, but the original Spyro and Crash games have been remastered and re-released 2 decades later, and the Spyro remaster has actually sold more than 10 million copies. Nostalgia sells. And to be honest, I'm surprised we haven't seen more remasters. But nostalgia does not stop at platformers. All genres of games from the early 2000s have a different aesthetic than today, or at least they tend to. There are numerous broad groupings of design styles used at the time, but I like to simplify it into just two. It seems like every game design from the era was either aesthetically dreamlike or nightmarish. Think how many dystopian game designs there were, or how many were soft and airy. Some used both in the same series. For example, Jak and Daxter was whimsical and dreamlike, but the sequel Jak 2 was dark and dystopian. But don't let that fool you. There was a huge amount of experimentation within those two themes. This freedom to experiment was partly because the graphics were less realistic than today, but to be fair, games were also less expensive to make. When you take this into account, the graphics are almost mind-blowing, a huge step up from the previous generation. Now just to be clear, I'm not saying all games from the era were good. I remember the E.T. game for PlayStation 1, the one that came out 2 years after the PlayStation 2 was released, and that was terrible, genuinely terrible. I would actually rather become E.T. than play that game again. But anyway, that's a whole different video. And by the way, if you're looking for some games with a Y2K aesthetic, I'd recommend the following.